Greetings, friends of liberty. Here in the 18th century, I do say, I take no small measure of pride in the often extraordinary charitable efforts of my fellow citizens from all walks of life. Indeed, a notable manner in which this philanthropy expresses itself, not only by endowed institutions of learning, but also by what we call charity schools, by subscription, funded by the middle and upper classes, which offer instruction to numerous poor scholars who upon graduation find employment in this city. Presently in London, there are more than 60 such schools, truly a commendable example of prudent beneficence. However, if we look at charity in the 20th and 21st centuries, we find now that instead of private citizens, the government instead monopolizes much of the field, and in this book, Please Stop Helping Us, Wall Street Journal columnist and Manhattan Institute fellow Jason Riley examines the multitudinous ways in which your American government, in the name of helping minorities, damages them enormously. The opposite of beneficent charity. Riley's book is the latest in a long line written over the years by well-known conservatives, classical liberals, and libertarians such as Walter Williams, who wrote The State Against Blacks and Race and Economics, Thomas Sowell, who wrote Markets and Minorities and Disparities and Discrimination, and conservative talk show host Larry Elder, who has pointed out the idiocy of minimum wage laws and the welfare state. Riley begins by critically quoting Lyndon B. Johnson, originator of the infamous Great Society welfare state, who claimed in 1965 that you do not take a person who, for years, has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bring him up to the starting line of a race and then say, you are free to compete with all the others, and still justly believe you have been completely fair. This was Johnson's excuse to give money stolen from the taxpayer to minorities using the rationalization that you're helping them. The actual reality, however, is that if someone can't run a race well, you help to train and to raise his own level of performance before the race, so that when he finally does compete, he'll be able to give his best. But the last thing you'd want to do is let him start the race 10 yards ahead of everyone else, because then you would be unfairly penalizing the other runners and be motivating that runner to coast. So in this analogy, as in so much else, Lyndon Johnson utterly failed. As black abolitionist Frederick Douglass himself said in 1865, if the Negro cannot stand on his own legs, let him fall also. All I ask is, give him a chance to stand on his own legs. And that's exactly what Lyndon Johnson and his band of liberal do-gooders prevented. As Riley proceeds to show, the Great Society welfare state, which was government philanthropy on steroids, not only prevented many blacks from standing on their own legs, but crippled many of them. For example, as of 2012, after only 50 years of government welfare, 88% of poor black families had only one parent present, while poor whites had 68% and Hispanics 59%. As of 2002, as Walter Williams notes in his book, only 47% of black children were in two-parent families, compared to 80% of white children. Correspondingly, as of 2014, less than 30% of black newborns were born to married mothers, whereas 47% of Hispanics and 71% of whites were. What were these stats before Lyndon Johnson, with the connivance of black and white liberals alike, helped to damage the black family? Well, as Riley notes, around 1881 in the city of Philadelphia, 2% more black families had both two parents together than white families, 75 to 73%. And as Walter Williams again notes, in 1925, 5 out of every 6 black children lived in two-parent households. Another more indirect stat shows that from 1940 to 1960, the percentage of poor blacks fell by 40%, whereas from 1970 to 1990, it fell by 2%. So before the Great Society, a 40% reduction. Afterwards, 2%. When Mr. Riley then turns to analyze minimum wage laws, another putative instance of helping, and their sponsorship historically by unions, the result is yet again the equivalent of liberal do-gooders shooting the people they want to help in the foot before the race starts. Since, as Riley points out, minimum wage laws uniformly hurt the black community since there are percentage-wise more young people in it, who, because they're young, have fewer skills and thus are more shut out of the labor market by the artificially high wages of minimum wage laws. So instead of all those young black men and women getting a job and working their way up in a company based on their ability, they never get to start in the job market at all. Good job, liberals. As a result, in 2010, for example, only 1 in 4 black teens during the summer months could get a job, the second lowest rate since World War II. In very democratic cities, such as Chicago, the summer rates were even worse, with only 10% of black teens employed. Of course, as Riley points out, the list of Democratic politicians bemoaning the lack of job opportunities is endless. They blaming either racism or the workings of our heartless capitalistic overlords. Typical was President Obama, who said in 2013, "Let's declare that in the wealthiest nation on earth, no one who works full-time should have to live in poverty," and raise the minimum wage to $9 an hour. End quote. Why stop at $9? Why not declare everyone upper crust like him by raising the minimum wage to $50 an hour? Thomas Sowell aptly called Obama's fallacy the theory of volitional pricing. You just price it whatever you want. The next perverse way that liberals damage the black community while imagining they're helping children is with a centuries-old disaster called public education. Its history of incompetence so pronounced and of such long standing that the effects have been devastating. So, for example, a huge 2008 test called the National Assessment of Educational Progress found that black male children in 8th grade on average scored the level of 4th grade white girls. And in basic math proficiency, basic or higher, 46% black versus 82% white. Of course, it's not surprising that Democratic politicians are often against school choice, which improves education for minority children, with again President Obama and his administration famously opposing highly successful voucher programs in Washington, D.C. and Louisiana, despite sending his own daughters to the private school Sidwell Friends. At the same time, Democrats overwhelmingly support teachers' unions, the single most destructive force in American K-12 education. Finally, Mr. Riley turns to affirmative action and shows that even this way of attempting to help is doomed to fail. Why? To start with, it obviously and unjustly sullies the reputation of all blacks who can or have made the grade, a perfect example being that of Clarence Thomas, who relates that employers didn't hire him because doubting the value of his Yale diploma. He said, "Now I knew what a law degree from Yale was worth when it bore the taint of racial preferences. I was humiliated." Secondly, as linguist John McWhorter has noted, because of positive discrimination, many black kids start realizing, that you can get by in life by coasting and not doing your best. And Riley here quotes John Ugbu, a longtime researcher of the phenomenon, who says, "A kind of norm of minimum effort appeared to exist among black students. And this phenomenon has been increased by public schools socially promoting students, both white and black, to the next grade despite their failure to perform. Thirdly, there is no statistical proof that affirmative action has helped minorities, since, as mentioned previously, there's been almost no decline in the rate of poverty after affirmative action was implemented in the 1970s, only 2% from 1970 to 1990, whereas the drop was 40% from 1940 to 1960. In addition, the gap between rich and poor blacks has grown after the introduction of affirmative action, whereas before the gap was shrinking. In conclusion, I'd give this book a BB minus. Excuse me. Because while Jason does a good job on the 4 items he talks about, the welfare state, minimum wage laws, public education, and affirmative action, he misses several other important liberal ways of helping, such as the drug war, gun control, occupational licensing, and to a lesser extent, Social Security. How does the drug war damage black communities? By radically increasing homicide rates. After alcohol prohibition was repealed in 1933, murder rates dropped by 50% over the next 12 years, and likely a significant drop would also occur today if the drug war were ended. And how does gun control hurt black communities? By preventing nonviolent ghetto citizens, the vast majority, from taking back their streets and neighborhoods precisely from violent drug gangs and other murderers. And how does occupational licensing hurt blacks? By making entering an occupation, such as hairdressing or plumbing, unnecessarily expensive and time-consuming. And Social Security? Well, since blacks on average die almost 6 years younger than whites, they lose all those Social Security benefits they'd otherwise get and put in. Other than not covering these points, this book is a good addition to the literature on how the state damages black individuals and communities under the guise of helping them. On this note of philanthropic caution, I bid you well and remain as ever the Scarlet Pimpernel.